the Volvo 740 Turbo wagon. To you, they're two completely different cars.
I've always been a fan of Volvo's approach to car design ever since Roger Moore drove the stunning, almost Italian-like P1800 in the Saint. I grew up around Volvo 245s and 740s, witnessing firsthand just how awesome these cars were, not just from a build quality and safety standpoint, but also how practical and fun they were to drive. Even more so when you put a big American V8 under the hood, because let's face it, the size of the engine bay just begged for a bigger engine in the first place. And I have so many great memories with these cars, sneaking out with my brothers, drifting through the snow late at night in the cold, dark winter in the middle of an empty commercial park. Big snowflakes quietly dancing their way to the ground, briefly making themselves visible to the world as they pass the yellow streetlights. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I remember those moments so vividly with a smile on my face. Volvo was purely a Swedish brand, and what do I mean by that? It had Swedish values manufactured with Swedish materials. It was a car built to handle ski trips up north during the harsh Scandinavian winters, as well as long summer road trips to the lake with your friends in the midnight sun. All for a reasonable price. Now, time has moved on, and it feels like Volvo has too. Now owned by Chinese mega auto group Geely, which by the way also owns Polestar, Volvo is trying to keep its image as the safe, reliable Scandinavian tank while having to attract new markets by diluting its originality and becoming a globalized brand. It's even more clear now with the launch of their first ever minivan called the EM90. The first time I saw the Volvo EM90 was actually last night, and the first initial impression, or first 5 seconds when you look at something, even the first second, you have this initial impression. To me, this was some sort of Chinese minivan without a clear identity, much like a lot of Chinese cars are today, just mass-produced and pretty generic. But then I saw the Volvo logo in the front end, I got very confused. What is this thing? And of course, it is based on a Chinese minivan like we just talked about, or it could even be a student project. That's what I thought when I first saw this. So let's have a look at what this actually is before we jump into Photoshop and talk about this design. So the new Volvo EM90 is a $114,000 luxury electric minivan with over 400 miles of range, which is very generous with this testing that they've done here. The first ever minivan from Volvo is based on the sister company Zeekr new 009 MPV and features a 6-seater layout with power provided by a 268 horsepower electric motor. So this is only the single motor. So it's dubbed the EM90. This is an all-electric model, boasts a range of 450 miles or 720 kilometers, and is specifically designed for Chinese customers. So we won't see this, probably not in Europe either, or here in the US. As of now, there are no plans to introduce this into the Western markets. Volvo claims the minivan is a nod to the 1953 Duet, and I can't see that whatsoever. I feel that is just an attempt to bring some sort of connection to the previous Volvos, the history of Volvo, into this model. But I definitely do not see any sort of connection to the 1953 Duet in this minivan. So it's clearly a lot more similar to the Zeekr 009. If you look at the side view, they're essentially the same design, echoing the days of GM's badge engineering bonanza in the late 80s and 90s. These two electric minivans are pretty much identical twins. The third fully electric model by Volvo this year is set to launch with a single motor, the 268 horsepower electric motor on the rear axle. This powertrains allow the premium minivan to accelerate from 0 to 60 in 8.3 seconds. Not too impressive for an EV, but it is also a minivan. Do you really need a minivan to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds? They kind of have a version of that with the Zeekr. 10% to 80% in under 30 minutes, which also seems to be pretty standard these these days. Now, Volvo has not confirmed whether it will be offered with the dual motors from the Zeekr. That has 536 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds in a big minivan. I mean, what times we live in these days. It's probably going to be completely quiet. You're just going to see a block on the road just blast past you and wonder what the heck was that. So the EM offers 3 rows of seating in a 2+2+2 layout. You also have a 15.6-inch screen that descends from the ceiling in the back seats, almost like the BMW i7's screen in the back. You can see that right here. So more screens. Not sure if that's a good thing or not. The dashboard is highlighted by a compact digital instrument screen and a much larger, again, two 15.4-inch screens in this infotainment in this car, in addition to the infotainment system, with very few physical buttons inside. And this is what I want to talk about when we jump into Photoshop as well. Headlights taken straight from the EX90. They didn't bother to redesign those. So let's jump into Photoshop here and quickly have a look at what's going on here with this design. So what is Volvo, what's going on at the Volvo right now? I think, as I said in the beginning, that this is just a cash flow product to bring in some more funding for the company. And I'm also very confused. We have Polestar and we have Volvo. Both Polestar, as we know, is all electric, but Volvo right now focusing also on pretty much only electric cars. So what is going to be the difference between Polestar and Volvo as we move into the future? It feels like those could easily just be one brand and keep it simple. So here we have the initial sketches from Volvo design team, and I'm not sure how fun it would be to sketch something like this when you already have the exact same minivan in production already in the Zeekr 009. What you can play around with as a designer here now is the graphics. So you have the graphics in the rear end. We can change those out. We don't want to have them be exactly like the Zeekr, but pretty much everything else except for the rear graphics and the front end graphics, of course, are going to be different for the Volvo. Looking at the side view, it has very clean lines, but it doesn't really have these same lines in the production version, but it definitely has this practicality that we've come to know from Volvo, with this very straight roofline creating a lot of space in the interior. Clean design and pretty Scandinavian, I would say, but there's just something missing about this minivan that doesn't make it a Volvo. And I saw it the first 2 seconds I saw this minivan. I didn't see a Volvo in it until, you know, I started to wonder why there is a Volvo face on this very generic looking minivan. With the sharp angles going on here, this is a more rendered version of the previous sketches that we looked up here. And then you have the taillight graphics. This is definitely where you need, if you're gonna, you know, brand, what do they call it? Badge engineer a car. The only thing you can do is you need to really hammer in the graphics. They matter even more now since the rest of the body is exactly the same as another car that is already in production. So graphics means a lot more. You can see that they try to hammer that in with this little graphic sketch up here. So looking at the Volvo EM90 itself, I don't know, let me know if you see Volvo in the, if we were to remove the front end, let's see if we can do that real quick. It's not going to be a pretty redesign, but let's just cover this up. Do you see a Volvo in this, or do you see a, you know, again, a generic Chinese minivan without much of an identity by itself? Personally, I definitely do not see a Volvo here, even though as I said, the graphics and the line flow and the proportion, maybe not the proportions, but everything else about this feels almost Cadillac-ish to me, because we have this upswing in the back as well. Not sure how much connection this has to Volvo. I know the XC40 used to have something similar to that, but it also is also, you know, available in the Zeekr, the exact same lines in the side. So we have this sharp shoulder line, then we have this sort of a shark fin sticking up right here with a very straight line up top. And then of course, taken straightly from the EX90 are these headlights. We also have a very similar front end in the lower section to the EX90. So again, I'm not sure how much fun the designers actually had designing this specific car. And then we have sort of a Thor's hammer in the taillight design with this sort of cross design that we have going on. Very static, and I do think that these graphics themselves, they suit the overall design language, because I think this design in itself is a pretty static looking car, even though we do have some very nice lines going inside of this thing. And then last but not least, the interior. I mean, what is going on with interiors these days? Why do we have to have everything being pixelated and everything being glass screens, removing any... We already removed the identity on the exterior. Why do we have to do that in the interior? It just doesn't make sense. If you want to use the argument that you need more range, so you need to make the exterior design slippier through the air and remove creases and stuff, I can kind of understand that. But then again, today we do have a lot of EVs that look very chiseled. For example, the new BMW i5 does not have this bean shape to it and still have a pretty decent range. So that argument, I think, is not valid anymore. But why do we have to bring this minimalist style into the interior? I made a video a while back saying that car design is dead. So if you're interested what I'm on about here, in that video I talk about different designs that we have in the world today. So for example, a telephone booth, we have, I think I talked about some train stations and stuff like that, buildings, and how everything is becoming minimalized and removing, just polishing off any sort of identity of the car, of the products. And that's what's happening in car design today as well. I'm gonna link that video down below in the description if you want to go and check that out. But at least Volvo decided to bring in the Orrefors gear selector there with the glass from a small town in Sweden that is called Orrefors, and they've been specializing in doing these type of glass sculptures and stuff like that. So at least we have a bit of a connection to Sweden when it comes to the gear shifter. The launch of the EM90 was inevitable. I thought it would be confusing, but it's not when you look at the numbers. Manufacturers need sales, obviously, to stay alive, and China is a massive market for minivans. And on top of that, Geely already had the platform ready for Volvo to build this minivan on. I wish Volvo would have built a standalone minivan, one that still had the charm, warmth, and the uniqueness that I've come to associate with Volvo over the decades. Instead, we got a six-figure Zeekr with a Volvo badge in the front end. Because at the end of the day, the more globalized our world becomes, the more important it is to stay true to your roots. And for that reason, I'm totally okay with the EM90 not coming to the US.